welcome to the Petey Performance Podcast. I say Dr. Warren Bradley, obviously because you have that PhD at the end of your name, but in researching and looking up Warren Bradley, I didn't realize there are so many Warren Bradleys out there, because you type in Warren Bradley and there's just a myriad of people named Warren Bradley. So you have to specify if you're looking up our newest guest or our latest guest, it's Dr. Warren Bradley of Hytro at the moment. So how are you getting on? What is on the agenda for today, and what are you up to?
Yeah, well, thank you very much up front for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here and chat all things blood flow restriction, I guess a little bit of history of my career in sport as well, and just generally have a good old chit chat. It's always great to delve into some science, isn't it? Never really hear myself being called Dr. Warren Bradley, so yeah, it was unusual to hear that played back, to be fair. Just Warren, all good. But yeah, I'm really pleased to be here today, mate. Thank you for having me.
Great stuff. Right. So you are currently working with Hytro. You are the founder of Hytro, which is a blood flow restriction based company. You develop and sell products that help athletes to use BFR in a practical setting to enhance their recovery, along with other things that we may be enhanced by using BFR. But originally you were a performance nutritionist. So it's an interesting route to get into business. How has that transition manifested over the years, and how have you handled that transition? We're getting straight into it here. Let's
dive deep. Let's go straight away. It's probably going to be quite a long answer because there's not kind of one particular strand to this. It's quite deep, really. So if I start from the beginning, really, so I did a PhD in human physiology and performance nutrition, which obviously is why it led me down the pathway of becoming a performance nutritionist in elite sports. So I started that back in 2012. My first gig was an incredible gig, actually, over in Ireland at Munster Rugby. So I was head of nutrition over at Munster Rugby. So that was really, jumping in the deep end, moving country straight out of, I didn't even do a master's, actually. I leapfrogged from an undergraduate through to a PhD due to my mentor, Professor Graham Close. So I started there as a performance nutritionist full-time while doing a PhD simultaneously. And then over the years, I kind of, as everyone does, move through different clubs. After 2 or 3 years in situ, I would then move on to a different club or a different sport. And I ended up going down a more of a consultancy route as opposed to full-time in clubs. Now, we may even get into that a little bit later, but the real reason for that was, and I'll just shoot from the hip and be transparent, the money in sports can be challenging. So you can come in with, high, postgrad degree, you could have a PhD and you still wouldn't be on huge amounts of money. And what I found with consultancy was you'd actually be paid significantly more to work for several clubs simultaneously than working for one. Now, that came with its own set of problems, which was driving 20 plus hours a week. Because if you're situated, for me, I was in Liverpool and I was working with England Rugby down in London. I was working with Hull City over in Hull, Derby County in the middle of, I was all over the country. So although the money was better, I found I was actually working a lot more. And in terms of not just working, just driving, 20 plus hours a week, it was quite brutal, actually, especially for the sleep and the relationship side of things. So there's pros and cons to all of this. So I guess what then led me to transition into business was, again, a couple of things, really. One was I had all this time in the car every week just to think about what I was doing with life. I really enjoyed what I was doing. I loved working with professional athletes. I love working in a team setting, but I just felt there was so much more to give if you could work there full time, but the money wasn't sufficient. And obviously I wanted, that paycheck at the end of the month, and I got that from consultancy, but this wasn't the job satisfaction there, I guess, because I wasn't there enough. 2 days a week just wasn't sufficient to build proper relationships. So again, looking from the outside in, outside the box, how could I make this a bit more effective for me and my lifestyle? For me, that would be transitioning into business. So then the question was, well, what business could I do? Where is my skill set? So my skill set really was science, delivering that science in a practical term in sports settings. So what could I create? What business-wise to deliver that? And actually, when I started thinking in the car over these hours and hours and hours, I was thinking about this technique I'd seen used loads in clubs, which is blood flow restriction training. And it had always really impressed me just because of just how effective it was for regenerating muscle tissue, structural tissues after injury or surgery. And because obviously I was doing the PhD, I was deep in the research. So I took a bit of a segue and looked heavily into the research of BFR. And it turns out you can use BFR for many, many other things very effectively, other than just rehab. So once I understood the potency of BFR and just the fact there was thousands of research papers proving the efficacy of this for like muscle gain, power, strength, endurance, recovery, I asked the physios and the S&C coaches and the medics, why are we not doing this more widespread with every single athlete simultaneously to help with recovery after a game or again bit +1? And the answer was quite simply the tools that were currently available were really complex and cumbersome to use. They're extremely effective, they're very effective, but it's a one-on-one device and they're quite expensive. So yes, they could use it, but you can only use it with one athlete at any one time. So immediately I had a light bulb moment. I was just like, right, okay, there's this incredibly effective technique. There is a lack of ability to apply it in a practical sense. You can only use it one-on-one. So what if we created something that could actually, breach that gap, provide a solution to that problem and bring BFR to everyone so that you could do it for recovery simultaneously with whole groups of athletes, and then obviously transition that to consumers down the line. So at this point in the car, it really was a light bulb moment. I was like, right, I want to create a business that leverages my skill sets. I found a problem, create a solution in my head. Now I need to go about creating a business around this, which is obviously the biggest hurdle for me because I was a geeky scientist, not a businessman. So I went to work during this period of time. I was working with a company in London called Goalmaster, and they provide strength and conditioning, nutrition services for kind of CEOs of companies, blue chip type, high earning professionals. And the guys that I work with there, Raj and Paul, I just pitched them my idea. I said, look, you're really into sports. You're obviously from a business background. What do you think of my idea? And again, that light bulb moment struck them. And off the back of that, we created the company Hytro together and transitioned into business. And I slowly petered out my consultancies and went full-time into Hytro. So that was a hugely long answer, but you can see it was quite a complicated process. It wasn't just a binary, I'm moving on and create a product. There was a lot of elements that went into it.
But that's what I find so interesting about it, because people think when somebody comes up with a business or a business idea, they have that eureka moment. And you did say you had a light bulb moment, but there was a lot of things that you had to do before you had that light bulb moment. So you had all of the research, you knew all of the information, you quizzed and did essentially like questioning of your potential clients in the future to see what was needed and what the major problems were. And only then, when you'd compiled all that information, did you come up with the idea. And I'm sure it's changed loads over the last few years. Like there's loads of refinements. But I find that to be quite powerful for people that are thinking about getting into business, because it makes it a little bit more real or a little bit more realistic, because it's not like you looked at a BFR cuff one day and you went, I have an idea. And it came from lots of market research essentially, and also your skill set is based there in terms of all your work that you did in Liverpool and with all your professional clubs, so you had the knowledge base there to go and drive it. But obviously it was just the business skills that you had to develop after that. But something that's interesting is your business partners, they were working obviously with high-end CEOs, but in a way there's real similarities between their lifestyle and the lifestyle of a professional athlete, and the problems that you would see in both, because both demographics are very time poor. And that is what Hytro solves, because in a one-on-one setting with a BFR cuff, as you said, it's not very time effective, because you can only use it one athlete at a time. Whereas with your products, it's a lot easier to run it with a full team, because obviously you can have more devices, or more t-shirts or shorts, etc., whichever you're using, and you can run them all concurrently. And it's a lot easier, I would say, for the athletes to use because of the number scaling system that you're using in comparison to the pressure system that would be with BFR. So maybe I'm just blowing you up there a little bit, but like at the same time, I can see why you've went in that direction and why it's working. So to pull it back a little bit, what were the business skills that were absent at the start, and how did you go about developing them? Did you just do the same thing and go and talk to people and see what you needed to read and where you needed to develop?
Yeah, I guess pretty much as you just highlighted, but I think having the skill set of doing a PhD, so the skill sets you acquire doing a PhD, which is critiquing research, observing things differently, and really just pulling things apart and trying to question everything and then coming up with your own hypotheses and solutions. That's kind of what I did again. I was thinking this is a brand new field for me, business, and literally zero experience, honestly, zero. I've come from like a geeky scientist who writes papers and, supports athletes, having no clue about business, but knowing I had an incredible idea that, by the way, I applied for the patent for this several years before I even met these guys. So I knew there was something here, but I just didn't know how to monetize and create a business out of it. So yeah, I put everything in place that I could at the time to then obviously keep my eye out for the right people to go into business with. So really it was meeting the right people and learning as much as I could from them. So just to give you some context, Paul, who's our chairman, he spent 35 or 40 years as an M&A lawyer at one of the top professional law firms in London. And he actually helped set up the offices in Dubai. He's he's Yale and Harvard educated. He's an incredibly intelligent man. So I've just been picking his brains for the past 3.5 years, trying to learn as much as I can from this guy. You'd be spending a few grand an hour to spend some time with him in the corporate world. So I have the luxury of spending a lot of time with him. And equally Raj, an incredibly, intelligent man that works in banking and accountancy. And, I won't profess to completely understand exactly what he did, but working in the city of London, and he works at a very, high level, his management skills are incredible. And I've learned so much just from working side by side with him. And I guess, to be honest, having a startup, you don't necessarily have the time, or that you wish you did, but have the time to go reading books and doing research into business. Now, of course, it would help you. But when everything is a pivot every other week and you need to make sure the business is functioning properly and learning and then remodeling everything every other week, it's nearly impossible to add that additional education element. So what we have very luckily is we have very different skill sets that combine together to make a really synergistic team. Like Raj and Paul are not scientists. They can't do what I do, but equally, I cannot do what they do. And the fact is, we're all willing to learn. So we're very malleable in our practices, but we learn from one another. So my learning, honestly, has been from these two gentlemen I've met. But what better learning than from people with experience in that field, in that area? And the same for them, I guess. They've learned so much about BFR and understanding sports. My background in sports, it's been eye-opening for them equally. So it's really been finding the right people to build that team with, and I've been exceptionally fortunate in that regard. Now, if anyone's looking to start up a business, you may have them skill sets already. I highly doubt you would have all of those skill sets. So what I would advise is you find a team that works, that plugs the gaps. What are you missing? And for me, it was a lot, but I did bring a lot to the table. So when I found the right people, it was just a really coherent business together that we created.
Sounds like the A team, so it does.
Yeah, I get
put it together, all the different skill sets.
Yeah, well, that's it, isn't it? I mean, yeah, if you're lacking in a certain area, you need to plug that gap, right? And that's exactly what we did. And I
think a lot of coaches struggle with that, and practitioners and business owners. And I think that's very important to highlight, because a lot of the time with a startup or with a founder, they'll struggle to relinquish a little bit of control, and they'll take it as, I'll do it myself. I can do it. Whereas what we've been talking about so far is being time poor, and you are time poor in the industry. And that is the reason you got out of say working with clubs, etc., because the salary to hour kind of ratio wasn't to the liking, and isn't optimal, because you have to put in so many hours to get a certain paycheck. And then on the other side of that, you can still count those 20 hours driving as hours that you can't do something else when you're consulting. So in relation to making a lot of money or making a high amount of revenue, it might have been working, but you don't have time. And likewise, when you start a business, if you try and do it all yourself, then you're not going to have time either, because you're going to have to try and fill all the gaps whilst doing what you just alluded to there. You don't have time to do, is improving your knowledge base and improving your education in various areas. So you've got to be willing to reach out and seek help. And I think there's parallels there with a lot of S&C coaches, nutritionists, etc., that you are probably better spent getting a team around you that fills the gaps that you don't. And very important to highlight as well, in the past, from speaking to a lot of coaches, sometimes you can try to hire people in your own image. And the problem that arises then is it creates a little bit of a vacuum. And maybe you do that because you don't want to create too much conflict and you don't agree with people in certain scenarios, but you can't agree with everyone in every scenario. And that's the benefits of having a team, that you have those conversations. And it sounds like there would be those conversations amongst the three of you guys and many others that are working with Hytro, I'm sure. And that's how the business develops. That's how you stumble across problems and then find the solutions.
I think that's a really good point there. And something I've been really lucky with Raj and Paul is that despite being at the top of their field, they're so willing to be understanding and malleable to other people around them. So as you say, you might hire in your kind of own, someone with your own kind of characteristics. We realized early on, and especially Raj managing this, we realized early on that we couldn't do that. And we had to bring in someone that was almost abrasive, you know, someone that would ask you hard questions and really pose the difficult things to you. If you just want to hear positive things all the time, you're not going to move anywhere. You're just going to stay stagnant. So I've actually really respected the way that the guys I work with have dealt with that type of thing and brought in people who are very dissimilar, really. But we get on because we're all respectful and we all understand, you know, we each have a place in this business and we do get on very well. But even Raj and I, very different personalities, but we get on exceptionally well because we understand one another and we're very open and transparent. So yeah, extremely important. But you've got to understand that we've made a lot of, you know, errors along this journey. You have to make errors to obviously start making progress as well. So you have to take the L's, as people say in the industry, take the losses to make, you know, the future gains. And we've done a lot of that. But as long as on aggregate you make more positive steps forward than negative steps backwards or stagnancies, then you're going to move forwards and you're going to do well. And that's what we've been very, very good at doing, I guess. Picking ourselves up and going again. If it didn't work out with this club, why not learn from that and move on forward? What about the product? How we improve the product to service the need that this club has come to us with? We're very reactive, very, very reactive. And it's so important not to rest on your laurels. And I think we've been good at that.
So that springs to mind then the question that I wanted to ask you was, how close is the current product to the initial idea for the product? Is it completely and utterly just beyond belief, completely different, or is it still similar with just a lot of improvements? And then it might be beneficial for you, because this is mainly an audio podcast, as we said, to give an overview of the product and how Hytro works.
Sure, absolutely. So funnily enough, it was actually my missus and I made the first product, I guess, in our spare bedroom with a sewing machine, with an Under Armour t-shirt, ripping it to shreds, you know, putting in some elastic and all, you know, it was very crude. It worked, but it was extremely crude. But it gave us the, I guess, the visualization that this could work in the future. And this was, again, 2 years before I met the guys that we created Hytro with. So product number one, I'm actually wearing right now. The t-shirt was product number one. And we're incredibly happy with it. It has changed, but we're incredibly happy with it. And the reason for that is because we spent over 12 months doing R&D. So this wasn't really quick. This wasn't a flash in the pan. This took a hell of a long time. And I'm talking, gosh, over 12 or 13 different iterations to get here. From everything from the angling of the mechanism, you know, there was 6 different angles we had to test to ensure that it contoured the delt and the tricep and the bicep perfectly in every different size person. And the same with the glute and the hamstring and the quad. To get that angle right, it sounds simple. Honestly, we took 6 different iterations. It was crazy. The strap widths, we had to ensure that the distribution of pressure across that limb was completely standardized across the whole surface area of that limb, not only around it, but from the inside out to the outside of the strap. So the material composition was really, really important to ensure we got a safe and effective occlusive stimulus. So if you look at like straps that you can buy online, like really cheap ones from eBay or Amazon, they're just really cheap materials that can cause skin abrasions, bruising. There's no standardization, but also it doesn't distribute the pressure evenly. So it's actually quite dangerous. We spent so long ensuring that every single element of this product made it as safe as it could possibly be and as easy as it could possibly be for the consumer to basically plug and go. Now, if the listeners have used BFR, then they'll know this, but if you haven't, BFR should be supervised. And the reason it should be supervised is because it needs to be in a very specific location for safety, and that's proximal on the limb. So for those of you looking now, you can see see this mechanism is right at the top of my bicep, just below the delt. The reason for that is for safety. It cannot be over the muscle belly. It has to be proximal. So if you have an independent cuff or strap, you need to supervise someone doing that, because if they put it on incorrectly, you can cause like ischemic nerve damage and all sorts of other things. So the kind of main thing that we've achieved here is we've created a product that's always in the right position. If you put on our product, it's proximal. It's going to be in the correct location. We also know that because of the material composition and the strap widths and the mechanism angling, we know it's always going to apply a safe and effective occlusion. We've also done pressure testing. So while you might see expensive mechanisms that have like pressure gauges and like wired digital devices, we've actually removed the need for that, because we've done the research to show you exactly what the pressure is applied in milligrams of mercury at each strap setting for various limb girths. So we can give you a table that says, okay, put on your shorts, go to strap setting 4, you're at 180 milligrams of mercury plus or minus 11. The plus or minus, the standard deviation is due to different leg circumferences, of course. So what we now have is a very, very practical way to do BFR, much, much safer than you've ever seen before, because everything else requires supervision. So it just makes it practical and simple. And now you can scale that to groups of athletes. And we actually have the first published BFR devices that can be used autonomously. Autonomous.
That's a hard one.
Yeah, it's a hard word. Yeah. So you can use this autonomously safely. So it's the first ever published device to do that in the world. So we're really pleased with that piece of research. But yeah, just circling back to what the product's like at the beginning versus now. So we are creating new products for the tees at the moment. We are increasing the Velcro patch size, and we have actually made an amend in the housing where we've removed a patch, which allows you to manipulate it even further to accommodate bigger arms. And if anyone's watching again, you can see this in our shorts. So here's the BFR shorts. At the back, there is a patch that's missing. So this is our second product. And the reason there's a patch missing is so that you can unstrap it and it can flex into the short itself. So you can accommodate a much, much bigger range of leg girths in here. And we're building that into the upper body garments at the moment. But I think what's really kind of cool is it looks simple, right? It looks so simple what we've created here, but the complexity that's gone into it because of safety is incredible. Like there's so many iterations, but it looks so simple. And you wouldn't believe the amount of different devices we tried as well. We tried pneumatic devices, we tried different buckle systems like electric, magnetic systems, all sorts of different things to try and make it like the best occlusive stimulus we could. And we circled all the way back to Velcro because we found out that it was actually the best mechanism to use. But what we did do is we built upon that and we found literally the best Velcro you can find in the world. It's a patented blend from Japan. It's extremely soft. It's really subtle. You can barely even see the hairs. It's not like big gangly hairs hanging off it. It's really lovely to touch, but it's extremely strong and robust and it lasts. You know, we've done 100 wash tests with stretch cycles and shear stress cycles on the Velcro. It lasts for ages. So it looks simple, but the development that's gone into this is incredible.
Yeah, 12 to 13 iterations is something like mad. I didn't think it was going to be that extensive, but it's a shock really that the Japanese were the ones that developed the best Velcro. Obviously, considering they make the best absolutely everything in terms of tech. But the listeners are probably thinking, because we've talked all about how the product has changed and how you use it and what it is, etc. But the answer, or the question that we haven't answered yet, is why? Yeah. And we did touch on obviously BFR being used for recovery, and I myself have used it a good bit in the past in relation to ACL rehab, where there's a lot of research there, and I've also unashamedly used it for biceps too, as everybody has, and that's something that you would be just anecdotally and from using it with people. The other systems for BFR or the other products, like it's probably not as standardized in that sometimes you can do it and you can feel like this, what's shown as the same pressure, probably because of where it is located on your body, feels different. Sometimes you could do a similar pressure and you could feel lightheaded one day, and then the next day you could feel, geez, I didn't feel like that pushed me hard at all. So you don't know if you're doing it correctly. Whereas that's really the problem that this solves, because when you put on that t-shirt, it's going to be in the exact same place 10 times out of 10. Like,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I guess what we'll do is then we'll briefly touch on again why the product was created and kind of all them safety elements we built in. But then I'll talk a little bit about BFR, because really that's what I want to build awareness around. Like, it's an incredible technique that not many people are utilizing, and everyone should be utilizing it. Whether you're an athlete, a coach, you're an elderly lady, you've got sarcopenia or osteopenia, you've got cancer. Honestly, there's so many demographics that should be using BFR, providing there's no contraindication, but you should be using BFR because of how incredible the stimulus is. So yeah, just circling back to, again, why the product was created. It was to solve a need to access BFR. So I saw it in the literature. It's well established for strength, size, power, endurance. A little bit recent years in recovery. Again, the research isn't hugely robust there yet. Anecdotally and intuitively, absolutely phenomenal for recovery. And we're going to come to recovery shortly because that's our big focus. But the point is, beforehand, because you had to be supervised, you could not do BFR without a practitioner on hand, which is going to cause time issues. As a coach, you have to set time aside to do one person. It's just completely impractical. So now we have a device that's proven safe to use autonomously. You don't even need to watch the athletes doing it. You can literally send them home and they can do recovery in the bed, or like when they're watching TV. It's that simple. So we can now leverage the benefits of BFR and unlock just the applications. So before, it was purely rehab after injury surgeries. But now, because we've made a product that's so simple and practical to use, we can do all these other things. So let's talk about those. Let's talk about what BFR does. So BFR, the basic premise is setting up an internal environment in the muscle to then magnify anything you do. So it makes everything you do harder, and it makes your adaptations much, much more efficient. So I'm going to demonstrate on the arm as well while I'm talking for those that are watching. So when you strap in your limb with BFR, whether that's upper body or lower body, so you see how quick that was? That was 2 seconds.
Awesome, yeah.
Like, I also know my strap setting, so that's quite easy, but you can see straight away my veins starting to pop. So what's happening here is oxygenated blood is traveling into my limb. The limb is then using that oxygen to create ATP. So it's smashing glucose and oxygen together to create ATP, so energy. Once it's created that energy and used it just for general homeostasis or for exercise, whatever, let's just say just a stationary, so not even moving, it's still using that. It becomes filled with deoxygenated blood because the oxygen's gone and there's a strap here stopping the blood coming back. So the arm starts to fill, or the leg starts to fill with this blood, which is now deoxygenated. Deoxygenated blood basically causes an environment it's a hypoxic environment, which means low oxygen. And that is really stressful for the muscle. So the muscle is now in this really stressful state. And that's the precursor to any BFR exercise, whether you're doing strength BFR, endurance BFR, or recovery BFR, or even rehab. That is the environment we're trying to create to then cause a magnification of anything you do thereafter. So we've strapped in the arms or we've strapped in the legs. You're now ready to pick your goal. So, okay, today I want to improve my strength and power. You're going to do a strength BFR protocol while strapped in. What's going to happen when you do exercise with BFR applied is even more blood is then going to pump into that muscle because you're obviously contracting it. So you're going to cause even more significant cell swelling, muscle cell swelling, and even greater hypoxia. So you're creating even more stress. So what happens then is you only lift very light weights. So we're talking 20 to 30% 1 hour in, very light. So if you're doing a bicep curl, just for ease of exercise, 5-6 kilos, that's all you need to use. It's very humbling. It's no ego lifting with BFR, which is great. So what happens in the muscle is the slow twitch fibers need oxygen for glycolysis. They need oxygen to create energy. But because it's now deoxygenated, the slow twitch fibers are screaming. They're like, hang on a second, there's no oxygen here. What am I supposed to do? I can't contract anymore. So the fast twitch fibers kick in. But bear in mind, fast twitch fibers require a heavy stimulus to be engaged normally. So normally a strength power movement would engage your type 2 fibers. But with BFR, you can engage all of your fibers simultaneously because of the conditions you created in that muscle. So essentially, you're tricking the muscle into engaging all of its fibers at the same time. So what we're getting is a training effect in all of your muscle fibers. All of your motor units are getting trained. So that's one element to strength training with BFR. You're training all the muscle fibers with very light loads. But the other element is the hormonal pathway. I'm just going to take this off because it's actually getting a bit.
Yeah, I can imagine. But do you know what came to mind when you put that on so seamlessly? Like it took you less than probably 2 seconds, less than 1 second, is when you're trying to do BFR yourself for your bicep curls, the hardest part is getting the second BFR cuff on after you have the first one on. And you're like trying to pump it, but this arm is already filling with blood because it's already occluded. So I just was looking at that. I was like, that is so simple that he's just pulled that strap, strapped it, and then the other side pulled it and strapped it. And I think as well, something that's useful to note for any athletes that are listening, because coaches will have understood exactly what you've said there. But when I'm trying to explain this to athletes sometimes, or general population clients, what I hear is, oh, but like no oxygen in my muscle, that sounds dangerous. But that's what we're trying to achieve when we go high rep at anything. And that's what we're trying to achieve to elicit adaptation when we're training. That's what conditioning is creating that hypoxic environment and that metabolic stimulus so that the muscle grows. So what Warren's talking about here is just highlighting and improving that stimulus by utilizing a tool that makes it a little bit easier to create that environment. So it's completely safe. And as well as that, he has touched on activating the fast twitch muscle fibers. Like the reason that we can't activate those fibers consistently all of the time, every day of the week, is because it usually comes with a little bit of neural fatigue, because you've got to push high power and high velocity movements. So you can't do that every day, or it would probably increase your risk of injury slightly. But by doing this high rep BFR training on your off days, it's completely safe because it's conditioning and it's for recovery. It's a safe way to train all of the muscle fibers together. So that is in a nutshell, I think, the benefits. And I probably haven't explained it as well as Warren has because I don't do it for a living. But maybe for our Irish listeners, they might understand that a little bit more.
I've got an anecdote for you, just that I sometimes use. It's quite easy to understand. So as you mentioned, quite rightly so, it's the last few reps when you're creating that kind of the metabolic stress in the muscles. So say you're doing a bench press, it's, reps 7, 8, 9, and 10. Do you really feel it, right? You feel that burn, that lactate buildup, that metabolite buildup. What BFR does is it takes you there immediately and locks you into that period for several minutes. So if you think about, as an S&C coach, time under tension is a well-known principle. We're talking here about time under stress. So if you accumulate or add up the amount of time under stress in a normal session, so let's say it's the last 3 reps of every exercise. Let's just assume it's that, right? We're talking over the whole session, 1 minute, maybe under that stress. Probably it can't be much more, maybe 2, okay, tops. With BFR, you're achieving that immediately. So if you do BFR for 5 minutes, you're getting 5 minutes of metabolic stress. Therefore, it's a very time efficient way to train, because you could do your lower body, your limbs, lower limbs, for example, doing a split squat or an air squat or just a very light squat, or look, any exercise on the lower body. And you're taking them to that metabolic stress immediately and you're locking it in there for 5 minutes. Therefore, the net outcome is the same as doing 2 or 3 sessions, in terms of the metabolic stress. And that's why it's so quick at creating adaptations in the muscle. It's basically biohacking the body to feel the stress, that metabolic buildup, much quicker and for long periods of time. So time under stress. Okay, that was quite a long anecdote, but I hope it made sense.
No, completely. Yeah. And another anecdote for you about why we're touching on lower body and we're touching on how safe it is and how easy it is to put on and take off. I have a hilarious anecdote about BFR gone wrong. And it was during COVID when I was living in Singapore and I was still undergoing my ACL rehab from my knee reconstruction. And I thought it would be a good idea, probably because of a little bit of cabin fever during COVID, to go with a front rack split squat, front foot elevated split squat, and do BFR on that for high reps. And as you can imagine, focusing on the literature and going in line with the research, I was doing the high rep model of 30, 15, 15, 15 on each leg, with both legs occluded, and probably had more load than I needed. And it was probably out of the reason was probably because I only had a certain amount of equipment in my gaff. Like, so I had to go a little bit heavier. So this led to a major spike in blood pressure, which led to me sitting on the floor of my shower afterwards for about 15 minutes, feeling violently ill. So obviously, if you go with the shorts here, it's just, and partly that's because of after I finished the reps and finished the 4 sets, it takes so long to get the other cuffs off, whereas these ones you can just take straight off. So you have to release, with the other ones, you have to release the valve, release the air out of them, and then take them off, obviously, which in my hyper stress state, due to my training, I was less than capable of doing at that time. So just around safety, buy these shorts because it'll take that away. And don't do anything stupid like that. But hopefully we won't be in a COVID situation again when people get bright ideas like myself in that situation.
I'll tell you what, it's the right time to do it because you can train with 0 weight. So you should have done that without any loading. You should
exactly
have done body weight. So I do body weight split squats with these on. It's brutal. It's actually one of the hardest exercises to do, and it's only body weight. So I actually do this a lot when I travel. So if I'm ever on holiday or on a work trip, hotel room, 5 minutes, split squats, all Bulgarians, foot up on the bed or a chair, 15 reps aside. So I do the 75 rep protocol, but I just do it continuous. So I do 15 left, 15 right, 15 left, 15 right, through to 75. It takes about 4.5 minutes, and it's savage. It's that 4.5 minutes of pure metabolic stress. But afterwards, wow, it's incredible. You just feel great because of the endorphins, the dopamine, the flush that you can feel in the body, and you can feel the hypertrophic stimulus surging through your body. So what's incredible there is I've actually achieved a hypertrophic stimulus. I've actually grown. Basically, I've improved strength, size, and power during that 4.5 minute period. Obviously, you need to accumulate it over time. It's not immediate. But the point being, it was a sufficient stimulus as if I'd done a squatting session, and it was just in the bedroom, with body weight. So highly advise, if we ever do enter another, hopefully touch wood we don't, but lockdown scenario, something like this is perfect because you don't need any weights. You can do push-ups with the upper body. You can do, push off the wall, resistance banded work, squats, you can do anything really.
But that's the versatility of it. And that's the benefit that it gives as well. And that's the benefit that it gives in a recovery setting, because obviously your background working in nutrition with sevens athletes, and there's so much travel involved, and they've got to they have to recover in very short timeframes in between events or in between competitions. And I'm sure you've seen the application of how it works and how it benefits those athletes in that setting in particular.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this is one of the first reasons I thought about creating a BFR device. It was actually for recovery. So actually, if I may, I'll talk a bit about BFR for recovery, because we haven't really touched on that. And that's really our primary focus right now. So BFR has been used for recovery, but only one-on-one, and it's very infrequent. I'll speak to 50 clubs, 2 of them will have tried it for recovery. It's honestly not that popular. And the reason, again, is because it's impossible to do with the devices at the moment. But what BFR does for recovery, so it's the same environment you're setting up at the beginning. You're strapping in, creating hypoxia, creating cell swelling. So what happens when you do this is there's a hormonal upregulation. So it stimulates the mTOR pathway, which basically upregulates muscle protein synthesis, or MPS. I'm sure you've all heard of that pathway. So that's now stimulated, really heavily stimulated and upregulated. When you unstrap, that blood flushes back around the body. So what happens is all the recovery hormones that were built in that limb now flood the entire body systemically. So even if you had damage in your little finger, if you strapped in your legs, that blood's going to go to anywhere with a vascular system, so anywhere. If you've got a trauma in, literally your little finger, if you've broken the bone, it's going to go there because there's a blood supply there. So you're going to get recovery hormones there. But not only that, for recovery, what we found to be the most important element is the actual flush itself. So the physical flush. The reason for that is, if you think about the difference of pressure between the limb and the body with BFR applied, there's so much blood pumped in that limb that when you release it, it's like squeezing air out of a balloon. It's really quick and powerful. So it removes waste materials and inflammation and bone chips and cartilage chips and free radicals and metabolites. It just flushes it straight out of the system. And then the body uptakes it and excretes it. That process normally takes like 72 hours. It takes a while normally. It does it at source. So this isn't a very scientific word, but he just sums it up really easily. It cleans the system. It cleans your muscles and cleans your joints acutely, like immediately, like that. So what you then have is a fresher environment to help with recovery. And what did we just create? We created those recovery hormones. So we've got two things. We've got this cleaner environment, and now we've got all these lovely recovery hormones systemically affecting the whole body that are now going into them tissues and structures. So the recovery from BFR is absolutely incredible and completely untapped. And what we found in professional sports is, because they already understood BFR, because they already understood the benefits for kind of performance enhancement, they already understood the mechanisms behind the recovery. So it's actually been a really quick and easy sell, because we've gone in and said, look, you know about BFR, you know about all these incredible benefits, but you've probably never used it for recovery. This is how it works. And then they're like, Jesus, that makes complete sense. And I want to circle back to, just for a second, the very beginning of our conversation and why we came up with this idea. Like, people in sports, from my experience, get very blinkered. So they're extremely good at what they do, extremely good, but they're in their lane. And they might read some research, but it's very black and white. It's, I'll do what the research says. So for me, coming in as a consultant and obviously doing the PhD at the same time, I was able to step outside and observe from the outside and think outside the box and say, well, hang on a second, this is how BFR is currently used. Why aren't we doing it for recovery? Because it completely makes sense mechanistically, like clearly it makes sense. But no one's thinking outside the box because they're so busy at what they're doing already in their sport. So now that I've provided that information to the clubs, is immediate uptake. So now we have over 30 clubs using this product for recovery. And it's just snowballed. You know, the more that come on board, the more conversations we're having, and the more that come on board then. I mean, we're getting inbound from, you know, America, we're getting South America, we've had Sweden, all over the world now are coming to us because they've seen us somewhere on a podcast, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But it's because of the recovery side. Like, people get BFR for rehab, they get it already. But the recovery side is huge and no one's doing it. But now they are, of course, with Hytro, and more people will be doing it with Hytro. But yeah, for us, the pillar really is recovery. And if I can just add one further point to that as well.
Mm-hmm.
A big pillar in sports is preparation or potentiation prior to exercise. Now, there's a lot of research on something called ischemic preconditioning, and that's basically BFR done before exercise to warm up joints and structures. And it's used typically for load compromised athletes or athletes who have joint pain. So we see it a lot in rugby players who can't overhead press or bench properly because the shoulders are, you know, damaged. So they do ischemic preconditioning prior to that session to warm up the structures. So again, I thought outside the box. I said, well, hang on a second. Every athlete warms up. Every athlete does some kind of potentiation, whether that's mobility work, plyos, whatever. Why don't we apply BFR in those settings and actually prepare the joints even further for exercise? So we're doing that with clubs now. And what we're actually seeing is we're seeing improvements in objective markers of things like jump height. So they'll do a jump height versus control versus using BFR prior to a session, and they're finding a significant improvement in jump height. Or we're finding an improvement in pain tolerance. So someone who typically has joint niggles, because of how BFR works in the muscles, it increases your pain tolerance significantly. And that's well established in the literature. So you go out training with an athlete who normally has a few niggles, they're completely removed. They can't feel it. You know, there's no joint pain there. And that means their quality of movement is much improved. So we are promoting the use of BFR now, not necessarily for rehab or for hypertrophy or for endurance, which is its traditional use. We're promoting it for bigger pillars. We're saying, what about recovery? What about potentiation prior to exercise? Because every athlete does all of those things. Your impact opportunity there is incredible. Of course, we promote it for all the other elements. Of course, use it for hypertrophy, strength, endurance, and rehab. Of course, absolutely. But that's, you know, that's a small percent of the team. Mm-hmm. Okay, maybe hypertrophy, strength, and power is, you know, a significant amount of the team, but not everyone. But everyone does recovery and everyone does potentiation. So there's your impact opportunity.
Just to circle back to the potentiation, because I was obviously thinking along the lines of recovery. With those athletes that have those joint issues, a lot of the time they won't get an opportunity in the session to push enough stimulus because they spend a couple of the sets warming up. Yep. So then they might only do 1 to 2 actual working sets where they're pushing adaptation or trying to elicit adaptation. So how much of it, well, you can't really quantify it, but Is it partly down to the actual stimulus of BFR that they're seeing the improvement, as well as partly because they're getting a sufficient warm-up in that they can push adaptation within the sets following that?
It's actually it's quite interesting. It's something called perfusion or reperfusion, we call it. So what happens when you lock blood in that muscle and then you release it? Fresh blood is then going to be driven into the structures. So it's basically perfusion is the driving of nutrients and blood into a structural tissue. So this is reperfusion because we've obviously locked off the blood and then it's reperfusing into the tendons. So tendons and ligaments are typically avascular. There's not a lot of blood supply there. So it takes ages to warm them up, ages, especially in those with actual pain. And that's why, as you say, you do a few sets first to warm them up properly. Now, just the way BFR works, like with the increased metabolic, stress, it intensifies that stress. It does the same here. So it intensifies that perfusion. So you warm it up quicker. So you're forcing blood into those structures, and therefore they become more elastic. You improve the movement, the quality of movement in that structure. So therefore, all you need to do is add BFR into your warm-up protocol, and you can go straight into your lifts. You don't need to bother with, you need to warm up properly, obviously, whatever. But my point being, you don't need to do several warm-up sets because you've already done that work. You've already done, those tendons and structures have already been warmed up because you've added BFR. So what we see BFR as is, and irrespective of Hytro, just BFR, we see BFR as an augmenter of pretty much anything you're doing, a multiplier of anything. So if you think about it in them terms, we're not here to say, just do recovery, just do this, just do that. We're here to say it's a tool in your tool bag to improve anything you do in performance coaching. So whether that's strength, whether that's endurance, whether that's recovery, whether that's potentiation, this will bring a benefit, and that's proven by the literature. The problem before was no one could access it. Now it's available, it's simple, it's practical, and it's safe. So that's the way we think about it. We go to a club and we don't go in and just say, this is what you should do. We say, where's the impact opportunity here? What do you do a lot of? What do you have problems with? Okay, we do loads of recovery. Okay, let's talk about recovery then. Or some other clubs might be like, we focus a lot on movement quality. Like we do a lot of plyos and warming up, and like, right, perfect. There's our impact opportunity with BFR. So it's really understanding what can impact you, your club, your team, your individual athletes, and applying it in that way. And you might ignore all the other stuff. It's just a tool to improve whatever you are doing. Does that make sense?
100%. But just to touch on those clubs then, and your first responding clubs, the clubs that got involved straight away, what was the initial feedback that you got from them? And what was the most surprising element of that? Like, was there any area that you didn't believe that they were going to go down rabbit holes with and they were going to see great improvements in, that you actually got a lot of feedback that they were enjoying its use there and seeing a lot of benefits there?
Yeah, actually, the potentiation was one that only cropped up in the past 6 months. So we've been heavily focused on recovery for the past year, just because we saw that as the biggest impact opportunity, which we still do. But there was a particular club, actually, we partnered, so it's fine. So Blackburn Rovers, they started using it for mobility, and they were finding that the athletes, were just feeling better going into the session. So then we've talked to other clubs about that, and they were like, wow, yeah, that makes complete sense. And they've started to do testing. So they're actually validating that protocol for, improving movement quality and reducing joint pain and warming the athletes up. So yeah, that was a really big kind of learning curve. Again, it was, and this is happening all the time, right? Like we're learning every time we speak to a club, because it's not a new methodology, but it's a new utility of an old methodology. We're always finding new ways that people are using it, as you say. And actually a really cool one, and this will probably take a little bit longer to integrate into clubs, but I see it as being a big viable tool for the future. But it's getting people conditioned to the feelings of fatigue and performing a skill under fatigue. So we have a boxer, Chris Billam-Smith, who we don't have. So he uses Hytro, and he does shadow boxing with the garment on. Now, if you think about 8 rounds into a boxing fight, you're absolutely goosed, right? He is knackered. He's trying to throw punches with skill and like executing it, to that nth degree, that he's really got to be surgical in where he's placing his punches, but you're knackered, your arms can't lift properly. But if you do BFR with shadow boxing, it takes you to fatigue immediately because of the hypoxia. So it's not actual fatigue. The skeletal muscle isn't actually fatigued. It's simulated fatigue because of the conditions in the muscle. So if you think about that for a second, we're not knackering the athlete out. We're just putting them in a state whereby they practice a skill under fatigue. So think about that now in football, striking a football. Think about it in rugby, passing a ball or doing lineouts. Anything where you're going to be tired and performing a skill that you need to be surgical at, do it under BFR. You don't need to do 90 minutes of conditioning. You can do it at the beginning, or whenever you want. But that's something that was really interesting that a couple of clubs have started to do. And it was actually based on that first case study with the boxer. But I see huge value there, because that then transitions from S&C to coaching. So it's not just an S&C tool anymore or a medical tool. It's actually holistically for the whole of the team sport. It's a coaching tool as well. Okay, today we have a game, tomorrow we don't want to fatigue these lads and, create, additional loading or additional minutes in the legs. But, we need to get upskilled in this area because they're not performing very well. Let's do some BFR. Let's just do some kicking drills or passing drills under BFR. There's so many applications with this tool that people have yet to understand. And that's what we're here to try and educate, but also learn. We're learning from coaches as we go. Like, people are coming to me with these ideas and I'm like, that's an amazing idea. And it makes sense scientifically. Okay, it's not published in the literature yet, but we know the mechanisms, and intuitively that makes complete sense. And because there's so many thousands of research papers proving the efficacy in all these different areas, and we know the mechanisms, it's not a stretch. Like, it's obvious that it works in this way. Just because there isn't a paper that says it does, doesn't matter. Anecdotally, it's proving itself. So what we're doing at Hytro is we're actually doing the studies just to really back it up and validate it, just to make sure we have something, put a stick in the sand, basically. But there's actually no need, because it's so intuitive that it does work.
That's awesome. I didn't even think about that. And I've never even thought about using BFR in that scenario, obviously with the skills base and working under fatigue. And like, it clearly makes sense there. I would, and you kind of corrected yourself as well, I would correct there for any listeners, maybe don't do it first. Do it second. Do it after you've done your high speed stuff and your actual skills at trying to push the adaptation and get better at doing them faster, because speed kills and speed wins games. But then after that, it will be perfect to try and elicit a little bit of fatigue without actually going to fatigue, so that you optimize your freshness, as we say, while not allowing your athletes to go into that fatigue state where they may have some residual fatigue then going into competition. But I can clearly see the application there. I think that's deadly. But an interesting one I wanted to ask you then was, I wanted to ask you, what is the most innovative way you've seen it used, or the most interesting environment in which you've seen it used? Because we talked about the versatility and you using it in your hotel room. I would imagine some of the sevens boys or have even probably been using it on flights, or people using it on buses and trains, etc. Oh, not flights. Sorry, obviously.
We need to put a pin in that one straight away.
Same as plaster of Paris. Don't do it on flights. But on
coach travel, definitely.
Coach travel, yeah.
That's been probably the biggest buy-in from clubs, because it's an immediate impact opportunity for them. Because what else can you do on a bus to recover? Okay, protein shake, Normatec if you sit at the back of the bus and you've got a bit of room, but you need to queue up for that. You've only got one or two of them on a team bus. So, you need a $2,000 upfront payment for 2 sets, and then you need to queue up for 3 hours because there's 20 lads to get on it. So even longer. It's impossible. It's impractical. So on a bus, using BFR is incredibly intuitive, really. And we're seeing a lot of clubs do that, especially when it's, over 2 hours on a bus, because there's that secondary inflammatory response as well as after a game. So you'll be sat on the bus, you'll be bathing in all these free radicals and metabolites. That's going to cause damage.
Are they doing it immediately post-game then, on their way back from the game?
Yeah. So there'll be a couple of different ways. Every club's different. So every club is down to the logistical viability of what they're doing. So some do a bike flush in the changing rooms. Some just sit in the changing rooms while having the team talk or whatever, having some food, a protein shake. A lot of them do it on a coach because it's wasted time. So they're just sat there not wasting time. It's wasted recovery time, should I say. And because we know the effectiveness of the flushing and we know how damaging it is to have them free radicals sat there, we want rid of them. And it takes 3 days to do that normally. We can do that immediately with BFR. And again, going back to that non-scientific term, cleaning the muscles and the joints to create that environment conducive for recovery. So we have a club over in France that he uses a whistle. So he'll whistle the lads strap in, basically. They'll strap in, he'll whistle again to unstrap. So the lads don't have to think about what they're doing. They're just already in the shorts, they're messing around, do whatever they're doing, whatever these lads are getting up to on the bus, all ladies. And they just need to listen out for the whistle. And that's it. It's so simple and effective because they know they're getting a significant recovery benefit, but they're not having to, they're not really having to time themselves or worry. It's just strap in when you hear the whistle and unstrap when you hear the next whistle. So, and just on that, because we haven't talked about the protocols, very briefly, it's 3 5-minute rounds. Okay. So you want to strap in for 5 minutes and unstrap for 2. And the reason is 3 flushes have been found to be optimal for recovery. It's like a full toothpaste tube. You squeeze it once, most of it goes. Squeeze it a second time, nearly all of it's gone. And the third time, it removes everything. So 3 is optimal. There's no significant difference with 4.
Do you know what's hilarious, though? I was literally, when you said coach travel, I was just about to say, you need to get into French rugby because they take coaches everywhere. Yeah. And from talking to some of the Irish lads playing over there, they hate the coach journeys because they take so long. They are stopping off in small little cafes and little filling stations, getting suboptimal kind of nutrition practices in. Yeah. And they just don't get home till such a late time that their sleep is compromised. So obviously sleep, they need to be focused on improving that and their nutrition. But if they can add an extra tool that's going to be of benefit to the lads, then that's going to make their recovery a little bit better, even in a suboptimal environment of a 4 to 6 hour long coach journey. But anyway, we should move on to quick fire questions before we finish. So the first one is proudest achievement to date.
Proudest achievement. Well, I guess it's got to be the handshake when I got the PhD because it took 10 years of study to get, so that was great. But equally, setting up Hytro has been pretty great. So I'm going to give 2 there.
And yeah, that's 100%. And the journey continues. I'm sure there'll be many more proud achievements to come.
Yeah, of course.
Next one is favorite athlete of all time.
It's got to be rugby and got to be Johnny Wilkinson, legend.
He's the most commonly named athlete on this show for sure, and he's mine as well. I would say he's
really?
between himself and Raj.
I mean, to be fair, I did work with Raj. He's a great guy, but yeah, Johnny Wilkinson, yeah, amazing.
What's the biggest thing you've learned in the last 12 months?
The biggest thing I've learned in the last 12 months. Oh, okay. So I guess it's really. I'm always in the learning phase now. So it's not resting on the laurels, as I said before, and it's making sure I speak with clubs regularly. I speak with the strength and conditioning coaches and various practitioners to understand how can we service them better, because it's all well and good having a product that I believe and we believe to be incredible. We need that feedback. We need to know how we can make it better. So the learning is just to always learn, just to keep learning and keep asking questions.
Okay, super. So then what would you tell your 18-year-old self?
A lot of things, probably to not drink as much should be a good one. Do you know what? I'd say I did enjoy myself a lot at university when I went, but just to make sure I did enjoy myself, because I know in slightly later life, in early 20s, just focusing extremely diligently on number one, career, but also like body composition and things that really didn't matter, like body comp, just do something that, resonates with you and you enjoy.
Okay, super. Thanks a million, Warren. That was super chat. Really appreciate you coming on, and hopefully we get some people interested in BFR. I'd say if people have made it this far, they're going to be 100% on board, as am I.
Brilliant. Well, it's been fantastic to be on. Thank you so much for having me.